British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss expressed fear on Saturday that Moscow could use the peace talks as a diversionary tactics for a military reorganization. I talked about this in an earlier video about stating the obvious. I'm very skeptical, Truss said in the interview that appeared in the Times of London. There are no signs of a withdrawal of Russian troops or serious proposals on the negotiating table. And Moscow lied it again and again. Of course, Kiev has the right to hold talks with Russia, she said. Well, in the government headquarters of the world, Kremlology is being practiced against these days. Nobody can look into Vladimir Putin's head, but his recent speeches, the use of weapons, the brutal bombing of Mariupol with no regard for civilians, plus the concentration of troops on the border with Belarus. His war, his illegal war against the whole of Ukraine went unnoticed by many, so there's growing concern that the Russian president is determined to do anything, but not to make peace. And there are some important questions that need to be asked right now about the latest developments in Ukraine, and I'm going to ask some of them today. What does Russia's first use of hypersonic missiles in the war against Ukraine mean? In NATO, the use of hypersonic missiles was understood not only as a military technical operation, but also as a clear signal to the West and NATO. Similar to the missile attack on a Ukrainian army training camp not far from the Polish border a few days ago, this is apparently intended to send the message that if the EU and NATO countries interfere too far on the Ukrainian side, Russian weapons could also hit them. Unlike conventional cruise missiles, the Kinzhal hypersonic missile is able to penetrate air defense systems very effectively. There is only speculation about their actual number in Russian arsenals. The mission was probably intended to convey the impression of Russian superiority. It is still questionable whether this operation indicates a new phase of the Russian offensive or even a new strategy. Should Russia also station or have stationed the hypersonic missiles in Kaliningrad, they could also reach Berlin with a range of 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers. The Russian exclave and the Germany's capital are only around 500 kilometers apart, and the ability to perform hypersonic evasive maneuvers make combating them more difficult. Hypersonic missiles have been around for a long time. Most ballistic missiles reach high speeds. Intercontinental missiles hurtle in the final phase of the trajectory at up to 15,000 kilometers per hour. What is new about the hypersonic weapons is their maneuverability in high-speed conditions. That's different with the other ones. The technology required for this is being pursued by 4 countries: the USA, Russia, China, and France. The aiming accuracy of missiles and cruise missiles is not increased by the new technology, though. The basic principle of nuclear strategic stability between the US and Russia, mutually assured destructive capability, is not changed by hypersonic weapons, especially as long as there are nuclear weapons on strategic submarines. In addition, well-known security experts consider the use of nuclear weapons by Vladimir Putin to be unlikely, although not impossible. And how would a Belarusian military attack on Ukraine change the balance of power? The leadership in Kiev is alarmed. The probability of an attack by the Belarusian military on their own country is high, the presidential office said. The fear is understandable. So far, no troops from the country ruled autocratically by Putin's closest ally, Alexander Lukashenko, have invaded Ukraine. And apart from missile attacks on other regions, the Russian military is concentrating on the north, south, and east of the country. An intervention by the army of the northern neighboring country in western Ukraine would therefore open up another front and tie up significant military forces at a moment when defeated Ukraine is having difficulty withstanding superior forces. Well, they're not defeated yet. The connections between Minsk and Moscow are close. The troops of both countries had practiced together on the border with Ukraine before the Russian attack, so they are attuned to each other. The fact that Belarus withdrew its diplomats from Kiev could be taken as an indication of Minsk's will to escalate. However, it is still unclear whether Lukashenko will take this step, because there are apparently signs of resistance in his country that are pro-Ukraine. Railway workers are said to have cut all connections to Ukraine. The chairman of the Ukrainian Railways, Alexander Kamyshin, thanked for the action. There is no more rail traffic between the two countries. This would mean that Russian troops in Ukraine would not be able to get reinforcements or supplies via these routes, nor would any Belarusian military be able to advance quickly along these routes. The campaign has not yet been confirmed by independent sources, though. Why is a diplomatic solution now less likely? The Russian side is no longer trusted, even in the German Chancellery. They fear that all attempts to find a solution for a quick ceasefire could be a diversionary maneuver, a kind of a new Potemkin village. In any case, the phone calls with Vladimir Putin have so far given little hope to Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Above all, the focus is on China's President Xi Jinping, who cannot have any interest in a prolonged and severe slump in the global economy. And British Foreign Secretary Truss warns that the conflict could worsen. The Russian president is becoming more desperate as his plans for a quick victory continues to fail. There is always a risk that if he does not make the progress, he will resort to ever more extreme measures, and we have already seen appalling atrocities in Ukraine. But what does that mean for Germany, for example, where I'm sitting right now? The federal government also wants more arms deliveries and is also changing its strategy of continuing to work on it, but not talking openly about it, mainly because there are fears that Russia will attack arms deliveries. All details are now de facto non-disclosure. So far, Western Ukraine, this is where most of the weapons come into the country, has not been so severely affected by the war. Weapons are brought into the country in secret transports, not in clearly identifiable convoys. German Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht has now openly stated for the first time that weapons should also be bought on the international market. It is now difficult or hardly possible from the stocks of the Bundeswehr, she said, but there are other options. For example, about upgrading initiatives. There are opportunities to buy material also directly through Ukraine, for example. But that is not a route that goes through the Ministry of Defense here in Germany, but rather a route that goes through the Ministry of Economic Affairs, because then we are talking about arms exports, for example, when it is bought from German companies and then delivered to Ukraine. So Habeck is in the game as well. And if the war escalated, would Germany be prepared? No. At least that's what experts like former NATO General Egon Rams say. Missing air defense, around 250 tanks instead of thousands, many of which are not up to date in order to be able to guarantee a robust country and alliance distribution. In addition, many things are simply not ready for use. The Tornadoes are to be replaced by F-35 bombers from the USA in the next few years, also in order to transport the atomic bombs stationed in Germany if the worst comes to the worst. But Lambrecht in particular is meticulous about the fact that it is primarily a question of equipment and not rearmament. Lambrecht announced this week that she would hold talks with Chancellor Scholz and Inspector General Eberhard Zorn about the €100 billion program to strengthen the troops. This means that Scholz is increasingly taking on the concrete implementation of his announced turning point. The protection of the population against a possible nuclear threat is also to be improved quickly with more bunkers and sirens. Armin Schuster, president of the Federal Office for Civil Protection and Disaster Assistance, calls for additional investments of €135 million for the ongoing budget deliberations, though there's a lot of work to do, and unfortunately a lot of time we will have to deal with this aggressive war of Vladimir Putin, the despot in Russia against the Ukraine. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.